Welcome to the Healing Collective podcast, where we explore the paradox of healing.
And we broadcast all of the healing codes to support a world of more heart-centered humans. Oh man, I thought this day, I was like when I was leaving all those messages, I'm like, oh, today's going to be, I pulled Queen of Cups and I had an hour cry and you cry so hard.
Yeah.
It's like no point even put makeup on. Like you're not going to bounce back because your eyes are too. That's happening here. Yeah. I feel fine. Just like, we ain't going to be, it's not going to happen today.
Great. I love those days. Those are some good days.
What do we talk about? Tell us. Well, maybe we should wait for.
Oh my gosh. I have literally I've been in this podcast all day. I should have started this morning and just been recording all day. But I feel like I've been waiting forever to have this conversation, but I didn't really know. I mean, I did, but at other levels of consciousness. And, cause this summer, I think it was on the way to Colorado, somewhere in transit, which is where I do a lot of visioning, is I started mapping a ritual, a white supremacy ritual. You can see my hand. I'm doing this. And it was you positioned at the top, of the diamond. Bethany was down at the bottom, had Carolyn and Mia. And then I had created these Megan Westgate was in there at the subset. It was a whole spiral of people with different roles in the ritual to integrate all of the aspects that I was I need this part to be held over there, and I need that one, and it was this really dynamic. It was a map. I usually map things first. And then I forgot about it because it's in the ritual book that I started writing and then stopped.
This actually really connects to something that happened today where I've been astral traveling. It's kind of a whole thing. I guess I have been people always tell me you came to me awake sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes I know there's all these situations. I know I astral traveled to somewhere human was a year ago, but I'm not intentionally doing it. I don't have a consciousness of it. So anyways, I've been working with Marla to more intentionally do it because I've been having these dreams where I'm attacked in the astral realm by dark energies. Long story short, had another one last night, and this is the message I got today, is that everything that we know about jail and injustice around our jail system and sexual trafficking and all that, there's layers of that happening in the fourth dimension. Mm-hmm. I would assume also the expression of what we call white supremacy consciousness, right? And that actually we're being initiated to wake up to the fourth dimension, because that's actually the place where we have power to shift it. We don't have power to shift it in the third dimension. Yeah. And then I saw this circle of women, and you were in it. And it was there was this certain vibrational resonance, and every single person in the circle, actively, consciously knew how to astral travel. And we were all in the circle together, being we're going to go fight demons, or we're going to go fight white supremacy culture, or we're going to go save innocence from these sexual deviant entities, in a circle, traveling,
which is safer,
right,
than doing it by yourself on the astral.
Right. And that I always say I'm a dragon. It's this whole thing. And that dragons, they're they're a snake plus with wings, you know what I mean? The land plus the air. And it's there are certain people that can be in both realms, and you actually have an advantage, because most if you're a fourth dimensional consciousness and you're just aware of yourself as that, or your fifth dimensional consciousness just aware of yourself as that, you're really disconnected from the third dimension, right? Your choices don't really matter to you. That's also why we make contracts that are I'm gonna go through all this grief and all this hardship because I just want to evolve, because I'm totally disconnected to how it affects the humans, And so there's something about being able to be a bridge between the worlds that gives like an advantage to impact what's happening in other dimensions.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that, hi, Bethany, we just jumped right in. We were like, oh, hi, how are you? And it was like astral travel 2 seconds in.
I'm here for it. Keep going.
Is that what Parker was doing? Astral traveling, needing you to bring him back?
Yeah, I had to address the other astral travel. Now I can address this astral travel. Good to go.
We're going to come full circle here. So I think that I was just explaining this, or like I was talking about it at school in front of all the kids, not astral travel, but that as an artist, that visions, I was calling it like the imaginal plane. And just that I think like that is where a lot of these astral travelers have like hidden in like the last 1,000 years, because it like wasn't safe to be a healer. It wasn't safe to just be like, oh, I'm doing this work. So it was like encoded in artwork, and it was like a place where you could kind of like safely traverse that plane. Or you could bring it into existence in a way that like within the category of art, people could like access it. And I think like, I mean, I was talking with Jonathan's mom, who was here recently, she was describing this experience. She's a super spiritual person, but very wounded on the 3-dimensional plane. But we connect on the 4th dimensional plane, and then we have to translate when we're together in like the 3rd dimension. But she was talking about how she senses presences around her. And I was talking about this term imaginal drag, where you're like in the 4th dimension, but then you have this like trail that kind of like comes with you. And it was just this very interesting like intersection of like 3-dimensional experience, where you have that kind of bridging while you're in 3-dimensional consciousness, and like the sort of like almost like a hangover from 4th dimensional. But I was talking with her about like being an artist and sort of traversing those, they would call it more like the spiritual plane, than they're not into dimensions, but it was a really fascinating conversation. And then we were doing like a big community art project at school. So I was talking a lot with the kids about imagination and calling on Adrienne Marie Brown and collective visioning.
There's so much that I'm thinking about when you said that, like, well, kind of like connected is, so I'm doing this work with, the healer that I work with, and she's recognizing that like in a lot of ways, my awareness is always in the astral. Like it's actually, I've been on this journey to like, what is it like to be in the 3D? Like, how do I really be in the 3rd dimension? But I wouldn't call it the astral. I didn't know where I was. I just knew like, I'm aware of stuff that it feels way more real, but I can't actually see it. But a lot of people can see it. So then I was talking to her, and she's like, there's astral chakras too. And your astral brow chakra is turned off. Like you can't see. So she worked on that. So now I'm having all these dreams, and I can see everything that's happening. And there's a lot of different things. Like I'm considering doing like a bondage thing with ropes with like this energy worker that I'm doing around power, because that's coming up so much for me. And I just had this like, so I have this dream where I'm like being attacked, like literally cut with like saws and stuff. And I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, my abuse like happened in the astral, and my body doesn't know the difference. And it's super confusing. Like, it's basically like I lost my power in the astral, and my body doesn't know how to like fully bring it back online. And so I'm also learning so much about whatever happens in other dimensions, like for it to integrate in the 3D, like our body needs a symbolic representation, which is what ritual and ceremony really are. And so I think that this like bondage experience is to give my body a sense and an experience of something that it can't fully integrate outside of this dimension.
Yeah, which is like, I think too, like a connection, like where like SE work comes in, where you're like rewiring your 3rd dimension. And I think like it's part of my favorite thing about ritual and about like wilderness collective work is when we all like dress up in the same color, and we all like hold a vibration and an energy, and we're, it's almost like it doesn't matter whether your consciousness is like fully there and believing it, you're seeing this like vibe and this energy, and like you're actually creating the space in 3 dimensions, which I think allows a kind of integration of that information as opposed to just like dreaming it or thinking it. But I also, I was that really resonates with me, what you're saying about being wounded in like the astral plane, because I think a lot of times people imagine that these sort of like higher planes are sort of purified, or like,
Yes,
that
that's
they're
the
like
whole
these
thing for
special
me.
realms.
Mm.
But there's different ways of co-opting power, and yeah, and like bondage and domination,
It's
like
the imaginal realm. Whatever you can imagine, you can have that experience. And then there's people that are creating those things together. And then there's like a weaving of it. And then now, like in the journey space and stuff, like people's higher selves are coming in and they're like, I don't know how to basically be human. I don't know how to drive the human. They have a different name for their human body. And they're like, I'm basically like, feel like I'm this like traffic control person between like the higher body that's mostly in like an eternal plane and like time and space. They're kind of like, you know what, like it feels like when you have a bunch of tabs open or whatever, or like let's say somebody's playing like multiple video games and they're like, I'm bored with that one, like it's not really that big of a deal. But meanwhile, that person's having like psychotic episodes in the third dimension because their higher self isn't like committed to that body right now, or like it's just a little bit annoying or whatever it is. And then like other people who their consciousness is so advanced, it like on a linear timeline, it feels like, oh, you're like in 4030 trying to bring that level of consciousness and that complexity into a body that hasn't really been helping fast enough, and it's just crashing and people are crashing.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Bethany?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'm having the same experience that the two of you are regularly having. What I am aware of is I did this like past life regression. And past life was in another dimension. And it was like a journey, but it was just like immediate full integration. There wasn't like, oh, I'm forgetting this experience, or I got to kind of like work to sort of integrate the learnings. It was just like, oh, my past life was that I was some kind of a being. I wasn't really like a human, I think, but I was some kind of a being that was activating people, and including babies. There was a lot of babies that I was like activating for the first time, like, or something. And I just had like this access to the light, I'll call it, but like this divine energy. And I would just triangulate it. Like I was just like, kind of like Reiki goes through you. It's like that. I was just like doing that and activating people. And coming out of that is like this deep hypnosis kind of thing where you talk to your higher self. And coming out of that, I was just like, oh, I like forgot. Like I forgot that there's a way to connect to like source, to trust, to that energy. And I'm like, my only experience of it is like, okay, I'm doing 3D every day, but it's like I have it in mind. Like it doesn't feel far away to remember that other thing. So it's like they're on top of each other a little bit. Is that kind of like I'm wondering if that's integrating interdimensionality as just being like access that just feels kind of easy. Do you think that's a pathway?
Well, what it makes me think about is this thought that I was having is like also connected to astrology. And like, for example, I remember like when I was at Aubrey Marcus, I had that intense breathwork experience. And while I was having it, my consciousness was like, isn't this cool? Like you were always going to have this breakthrough in awareness today, but isn't it cool that this is the way you chose to have it, or we chose, or, so basically what I'm saying that to say this needing to be symbolic in the third dimension and needing to kind of be aware of the connection between what you're doing out there and what you're doing in here to actually make it, I guess, something that occurs in matter, And so I would say like, in that example, like you're probably doing all the time, but there's some different impact that you can have when you're aware of it and bringing some kind of, maybe it's the Reiki training or, some kind of like symbolic representation of it. And I think that's what healers are doing all the time, right? They're just like being the physical ceremonial representation for that shift that we could probably track in their astrological transits was like going to happen that day in that way. You know what I mean? No matter what.
Yeah. Like when me and my kids all did, that was part of the confirmation, because it was like, oh, in this life, I'm still meant to be in activation space for Finn and Parker. And I was like, what do I need to do? And it was kind of like, you already know. And I had already planned to, my higher self was just like, she's already doing it. She's just keep doing what she's doing. And I had already asked to do a private, like Reiki level 1 training and attunement for me and my 2 kids to take together. And so we did that this weekend. And like, while each of us were getting attuned, I was just like super aware, but not in this like distracting, intense way. I was just like, oh yeah, like this is that, like, this is what's happening. And I just felt totally just in a state of trust. Like I was like, oh, okay, I'm doing with the flow. This is what we're supposed to be doing now. And we're doing it. And I was just like, and just in day to day with them, I'm just like more in touch with a state of trust at like a deeper, more cellular level that feels accessible all the time. So my only real experience with it, it's not my only interdimensional experience. I think there's other energy work stuff and SE stuff, but like this is like the key one for me, that I'm like, oh, I just got this lesson and this remembering. And as it integrates, I just feel more in a state of trust and not triggered, basically.
I mean, sorry, go ahead. Bethany, I was thinking about, or Lauren, when you were talking, and then Bethany, when you were talking, I was thinking about like almost like astral dysmorphia or something, where you're like, you have an experience and then you come into your body and it's so far away from your 3D experience that you're like, and that, I mean, I think that causes like psychotic breaks, and you gaslight yourself. And then, our whole mental health crisis is like, I advocate for the kids at our school who I think are just like struggling to integrate their interdimensional beingness, like on the 3-dimensional plane. But Bethany, I feel like you're someone who's doing a lot of work in real time to like upgrade your system, your 3-dimensional system. And so I think like that does create more integration and flow, where like, you trust your truth and act upon it. And there's not as much dissonance or like distortions in your like self-trust. And so I think being in that state of flow really is kind of like an integration. And I think that at least my experience with my higher self, and I think that's kind of like what you're describing too, and Lauren, you too, is this sort of like, you can tell your higher self sort of like monitoring and guiding you, is like, just like SE, there's like a gentle introduction to like how much you can handle and how to build your capacity, which is part of where, for me, things have been showing up in my dreams in a way where it's like, okay, this is going to crash my system if I see this or consciously acknowledge this. And it shows up in a symbolic realm, either through my art or in a dream. And then I get to experience it in the symbolic and in this like ritual space, but I'm conscious in that space of my higher self, communicating with my lower self, like, how much can you handle? Do you want some more? Are you ready for some more? And when it, this kind of like, I really came into like trusting my higher self that I'm going to understand and kind of unfold into like the healing work that I need to do as my 3-dimensional system builds capacity to hold that. But I think that, I feel like a lot of trust in my body when you're talking about kind of like that moving into flow and integration with your, like what the higher self is calling your lower self into. Higher and lower isn't exactly like the words that I mean, but provisionally.
I could see also like what you said, Bethany, around like the way you described seeing, even when you told me the first time about that experience, is like what I'm experiencing with like my astral brow turning on. So it's like, but I've felt stuff like that in my body my whole life, going back to this like gaslighting thing. And like, in the most intense place in my relationship with Heyman all the time, like where I would feel like I was getting like shot by bullets, like energetic bullets. And I just couldn't explain the intensity that was happening and like gaslighting myself. And then there's ways I would want to turn it off, or to your point, like this thing of like overriding your system, like like this negotiation and healing of my body in the last year and a half of like my body telling my higher self or whoever's coordinating, like, listen, like whatever's happening and the fact that I can't see it, like I'm struggling. Like my body is having all of these kind of like physical ailments as a result of not being able to fully handle everything that it's experiencing. Yeah, so it almost feels like walking through somewhere with blindfolds on, you know. And so when it's now that like it's starting to turn on, it's like I'm just like curious how that's will shift my experience of reality. Um yeah. But what I was thinking about is like, because you know, we set up this call to talk about white supremacy culture, and we were, you know, going to have other guests and things. And so I'm thinking like, compared to what I was thinking this morning, like, what if jail and like if it's as above, so below, and if it's like actually like higher dimensions are all projecting into third, you know, like let's just play with that as just an assumption right now. If like jail and injustice and even like racial hierarchies and debate and like sex trafficking is something I was thinking about a lot, because in most of the dreams and then or some astral experiences that people close to me, the entities, the energies are really sexual. Like in one, she could hear him taking the, like it felt like a male-ish dark energy, like taking the belt off, you know? And my sister had an experience recently, and I'm just like, what if like that's all happening in this, what we call the imaginal realm or the fourth dimension, and then it's like getting projected here? And what does that mean for like where our agency is? And you know, sometimes I feel like in certain situations, I'm kind of like a probation officer for like souls or energies that are in like have this opportunity to upgrade their karma, like if they follow like the guidance that I can offer. And I have these arguments with, I don't know who I'm arguing with, like some council of light somewhere, someone whom I believe has some kind of power or influence. And I'm like, humans are basically fucked down here. Like, even if they're in like a karmic jail, like they can't access the guidance of their higher self. They're walking around blind, like dealing with stuff that's so creating so much trauma in their body because they're like bumping into things. And you're, you know, believing this to be grace, that they get this like probation or this opportunity to up level their karma. Like I keep feeling like I'm this like advocate for the human. Like, y'all don't fucking know what this actually looks like down here. And like, I need you to have some compassion and make some adjustments to the way that you're doing things, because it's not working for them. So I just think about that in the term and like white supremacy culture and even the political debates and the way that it feels like people are vying for energy is what it feels like for me. And they know that they can control populations of people through belief and through fear, and for also from closing their access to seeing clearly for themselves, like the multiple dimensions of things that are going on. So if I can influence enough, like the, and I believe this has probably happened so many times in history, like on this plane.
Yeah, I mean, the energy that you're describing, like all of it, whether it's like white supremacy or, you know, sexual trafficking or just like supremacy in general, it's like it all feels just like very vampiric to me. And I feel like we're working, like, I mean, in alignment with like colonialism and extraction and just like extracting the use value from like every experience. And I think I'm wondering how, you know, we're down here, like, I feel like sometimes I'm just like, like trying so hard to like work on white supremacy at this level in my consciousness, in my body. And I wonder about how do you heal, like what kind of scarcity exists, you know, if it's as above, so below, and it's mirrored down here in these like forms of supremacy, which need to like extract and use and have like some sort of scarcity that then they're sourcing from other beings. Like, how do you heal or address the unhealed beings on the, or like energies or entities at the higher level, or not the higher, but like at the higher dimensions, in order to like make that change. Like you're saying down here, Lauren, where it's like a lot of people don't have access to the tools to access the guidance, or it's blocked with fear, or like layers and like ancestral layers of religious fear around like accessing higher dimensions or having like sovereignty over your spirituality. So I think like I'm thinking about it like at both levels, and I'm curious about the work you're doing to help people access those tools, and then like kind of accessing our own like hive here on how do you heal. What are the practices for healing it, like doing healing work in a higher dimension?
Yeah. I guess my theory would be that I'm testing right now. Like I haven't articulated it quite to myself. I'm trying to bring up this visual to show you both too, but it's like the visual will help it make a little bit more sense. But like, just like we have developmental phases. So if we thought about Taylor or Parker, or any of them, or even ourselves, and that we are all the years of life that we've ever been existing at one time, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like the highest level of awareness is integrating all those levels of awareness, right? Between like being a 1-year-old and being like a 90-year-old, and like all of that awareness, like being connected. And so what I think about is that I think that, yeah, it will make more sense when I can pull this up, but people are, there are, according to these theories, that if they are correct, there's like a Christ consciousness, for example, like level here. So open now. So like in this model, you have like, this is like the electromagnetic plane, the physical body, bioplasma, third dimension, etheric, fourth dimension, fifth. 6 is like highest initiation of this galaxy, Christ, oversoul, over self body. And in theory, it could like keep going really, like even to 12. So it's like,
That's what I learned in Reiki the other day.
Well, I can't wait to learn more about it, because I bet there's something there that something that I haven't connected to yet. But basically it's like, there are certain levels of consciousness that aren't having conflict and aren't suffering, right? And they are like, you might even like Matthias de Stefano is like kind of like they're bored. Like that's why they want to come into the third dimension and have different experiences. And in the fourth dimension, in the imaginal realm, it's like I can imagine anything and not necessarily experience it in my 3D body. Also, I believe that the fourth dimension is where like multiple lives happening at one time is occurring. So if let's say I can consciously become aware of myself as third, fourth, and fifth, or maybe even sixth, right? Then I can observe myself in the third and fourth and make conscious choices that are like what I feel I'm being called into is, sorry, my dogs, is like there's certain principles of being in right relationship with these dimensions and being in right relationship with Gaia, being in right relationship with the fourth dimension. And if we were conscious enough to make choices about what we're doing, and enough consciousness was like making choices to say, I'm going to create a reality and enjoy it. But there's certain like rules to keep this reality from like hurting someone else's reality, or how do I honor their reality while also honoring my reality? So in that way, like diversity issues is the invitation to that in this dimension, because it's like, if in your reality, you're a non-gendered trans person having certain experiences, and maybe you're spending most of your awareness in 4030 in another dimension, and I'm like a Southern white girl that, has lived in the same small town my whole life and is not accessing any other dimension but that reality, how can we both coexist at the same time in a respectful way and have the unique experience that I contracted to have and learn from, while you also have it, and we share resources and da, 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 da. So that's like the way that I think about it in terms of like, where do we have agency?
Well, I think we're going to hit the paradox early on, but this framework is also really similar to like Locke Kelly's the awake awareness, this model of like, there's like there's myself and my physical self, my emotional self, my witness, the one who witnesses my witness. It's very similar to this. And he calls it like, and he's like, you can just drop into this outer thing and hold space. So like different than say the binary model of like conscious leadership, like you're triggered or you're not. It's sort of like you can hold the part of you that's triggered if you access these other things. It's not that this isn't happening, it is, but it's you're holding all of it. And then, so I guess what I'm saying is, I think this theory exists all over the place and it is probably being accessed and explained by different people in different words and, different teachers and things like that. Something I'm curious about, I had that past life regression, and the night before I did it, I met this guy who's like an astral jumper, and he's like doing this all the time, like 20 times a month, going, checking things out, other lives, other dimensions, going and doing astral projecting all the time. And I was talking about it with a friend of mine, and just a lot of what he talked about, it wasn't the same as what he said, but I kind of felt like I knew what he was talking about after I did that experience the next day. It was so not random, but random that I met him the night before and stuff. And in thinking about this person, what if it's not about making things better and how to not do harm? What if there's a certain amount of chaos and a certain amount of order and a certain amount of pain and a certain amount of joy, and it's actually just all there, and we get to, maybe in certain lives or certain experiences we're moving through it, but that does affect some other experience. Like if the laws of polarity, I hope it's this upward spiral, I hope we're doing something and we're all going in a friendlier direction and all healing together in all the dimensions. But if it's everything, if we contain multitudes, what if we're just playing with polarities and it's affecting other things? I've had downloads before that really helped me with attachment at large as a human being, because I had this thought oh, I really want this. I really, really want this. And in that journey, it was you're going to get it. You're going to get every single experiences of deep suffering, experiences of pleasure and bliss. You're going to get it all. And if this life goes a certain way and you have these experiences, a different life that you do is going to go this other way, but you're going to experience all of it. So what if it's true that we're doing this thing and this is part of our map of how we're doing it, and we're seeing how in the flow of it we can really be, but ultimately,
it's
really change the thing.
Right. It is that 100%. The thing when that gets dangerous and what I see is in general, let's say if you consider yourself more conscious or more aware, more people who become aware are connected to that realm where it's it's all one, or, it's all this, it's all that. I think those are dimensions of consciousness, 100%. And that's what I'm saying is the experience I'm having is that I feel in collective, multi-dimensional awakening. Let's say if this is just a video game that the universe is playing for eternity, the universe is collectively becoming aware that as fun as it is for it to learn, there's also a way that all that learning and all that chaos is having positive and negative consequences on the experience, or the different threads. And some threads of evolution are more optimal for evolution than others. And I think that there is a more optimal evolution where as we become conscious, we can both hold that it's perfect in how it's happening, and empathy and understanding or awareness, consciousness for the impact in the plane that we're aware of. So when my students, I've talked about this on here, but I lost 3 students in 2 weeks and they die. Right. And I was really in the space of trusting that was what their soul called in. And at the same time, the grief was so, and so to me, there's something around interdependence. And it's if you're aware, you can be in a 3D body and live most of your life in a 5-dimensional consciousness and be a total F you to your 3rd dimension reality. And there's consequences. That the consequences might be that your kids never feel related to you, never feel attached to you, have to work through trauma for multiple years. That's also perfect. That also will create amazing evolutions. But part of the journey is to also become aware of the impact of you living in 5D on the 3D. It's all happening. And I do think that suffering and density is slower for evolution. I think that the universe is expanding, it's moving faster, it's constantly looking for more efficient ways to integrate energy and density. And so our desire to end suffering or to shift some of these things is at the core of it, like a conscious universe, just learning to evolve faster.
Honestly, I'm like doing myself till I'm a little undone here. I'm like thinking about it, and actually, I don't even know if I've got it. I don't even know if I'm fully tracking.
I mean, we're in the ethers a lot in using 3-dimensional language. So it's, I mean, just so you know, I'm barely hanging on, and I'm thinking along with you and tracking like at the 3rd dimensional level. And my like 5th dimensional self is super like excited and like active. I was thinking too, and kind of like thinking about white supremacy culture and consciousness too, is like, Lauren, I appreciate what the distinction you were making about like evolution, and that there's like a faster way to evolve or like a more optimal way to evolve, but that like it's evolving no matter what, like through these densities or not. And I guess like one of the things I think about with, or like Bethany, in what you were offering around that like there's chaos and like that we're experiencing all of it at once, is that I think that I just think that white people are avoiding, I guess I feel like in true interdependence, when you're really tapped in, that if you're connected to what's happening, that you would, in a healthy system, you would automatically stop things that were off, like that you would notice and you would stop. But I feel like a lot of people are in this sort of like traumatized, disconnected state, and not actually interdependent. Even if like up here, I know, like,
because they can't even feel the impact. They can't feel.
So,
like, I feel like it's
actually like committed at an ancestral level to not feeling the impact, because it protects whatever like
the reality that they want to experience.
Yes, and the reality that, I mean, and maybe I'll like talk about my dream for a minute, but like the reality is like, oh no, I've been extracting this resource to keep this reality alive for a really long time, and I don't want to give it up. Like, even if at the conscious level we're like, oh yeah, racism is bad, or like, you know, jails are bad, or the incarceration system is unjust, that there's like deeper and higher dimensional contracts that are holding those things in place. And yeah, so I guess I'm really in my sort of like journey with white supremacy right now. I feel like I'm about to start this work with Education for Racial Equity, and like Rosamund Menakem's like it's like Foundations of Somatic Abolitionism, but in this kind of like 9-month process. And I noticed when I started that work how much disassociation I had in terms of like, yes, I was like on board completely up here, but totally offline in my body around it. And so as I think as I'm getting closer to that work, my 5th dimensional self is starting to like show me stuff, like giving me stuff that I need to work with. And part of that was like this dream I had where there were like, I mean, I can share the whole thing, or I can just talk about it like generally, but it was essentially like every major place that I had lived and had roots, there was like a tree that was like crashing down from my backyard in my childhood home. So like Michaela cut a cord that was holding up this ancient tree that was so tall. I'm just going to cry through this, but it was so tall. It was like a Jack and the Beanstalk tree. It was like so tall I couldn't even see it. And she cut this vine that was holding it up, and it crashed, and it knocked down the entire neighborhood. And so I was like, in the dream, I was like circling around that to like assess the damage, and just kind of like, whoa. And then it shifted to being in Boston, and there was this huge, tall, black tower coming out of the location where I lived when the kids were babies in Beverly. And I was like standing underneath this like tall glass tower. And then that tower just crashed and just felt completely crashed. And it just like wiped out everything around it. And so then I was like,
We wiped out the lucky dog.
yes, everything. And yeah, it doubled it doubled with Rome. So it like opened up this chasm that was like a place I had visited in other dreams that was Rome. So it was like all these falling towers. And then I tried to call my dad to tell him that like that was my building that fell. Like you're seeing it on the news. And that was my building. And suddenly we were in the basement of the building, and it was like a corporate lobby, which is the place where Jonathan's family's like financials like are located. So it was like that lobby underneath all of it. And these elevator doors opened, and it was a plantation underneath. And then I was in the consciousness. I was like there. I wasn't there, but I was conscious and like watching it like a film. There were, African slaves in cages, enslaved people, like 15 people. I could see them. I could like make a film. Like I could see it, watching them open the doors, like open these cages and walk out. And then like, this is the wildest dream. And then like, I watched them like, and it moved back to my hometown, to like the town center at my hometown, and burying the dead before a revolt. And then I like moved into consciousness in the actual dream, like moved into a body, and it like zoomed back in time. And there was like a trial room. And there were like adults sanctioning kids committing acts of violence against other kids. And I was watching that. And then a white child came forward, and suddenly my body came online in the dream. So like, I have all these stories about what's going on here, but like, as soon as a white child came forward, I moved forward to like protect them. And then I was facing MLK, and he was on the judge, like he was like the judge of the panel, and he had a baby version of himself on his lap. And so this is, now I'm like moving into interpretation. I'll wait till after, but in the dream, like Stranger Things style, like I tried to cast a demon out of the baby on his lap, and like was like killing it. And it was like, so, and then I woke up and I was like, I killed MLK. Like, I mean, I was just like, oh my God. And so I was like, just the first thing I noticed was like, oh, like my whiteness came online to protect white innocence. And I like this aspect of my ancestry that's in me is like coming into my consciousness. And then I was just like trying to reckon with like shame and being a perpetrator, and just like almost drowned in my like, like fragility patterns, or just like, I don't know how to make, I don't know what to do next. And I don't know how to like begin to set it right. Like, I don't know, but it was such a like clear download of like, yes, like this is, you've been doing the work intellectually for a super long time. And here's the next piece. And it like, that was, I think not last night, but the night before. So I've just been kind of like
on Martin Luther King Day.
Yeah. After I had just done this major community event celebrating the life and work of Martin Luther King. And I've been like listening to speeches and listening to like Malcolm X and like Stokely Carmichael, and like working in the school and on the land of the school, and like doing all this work on the building of the school. And then, so I wanted to like talk with you all about it, and like just kind of like own the parts that need to be owned, and like own that like I still, in spite of all of the like very conscious work I've done on white supremacy, like don't know how to move through the shame and like how to like be with it. It's like my body still doesn't want to go there and hold that.
Yeah, I'm like getting so excited about this. Okay, I need to breathe. But like also in this, I'm gonna give context that may or may not make sense, but like, okay, in this model of like a universe, a conscious universe, or it's really multiverse or even beyond that, right? Like let's just say we know there's a polarity of separation and oneness. And let's say that it plays the game of going as deep into separation as it can to remember oneness, to go back into separation, to remember oneness. Like, let's just say that as a model, that's what's happening. Like, I feel like, and that our bodies are these like magnificent, unbelievable systems that are constantly just firing. Everything that's firing is like what's also happening in this conscious universe on its journey. And we're each like a cell of that journey. I feel like where we are on the arc of the journey that we're in this dimension is like a reckoning. And also like in terms of efficiency, even what we're seeing, right? Like people are healing trauma at faster levels, building more neurological pathways, like clearing karmic like sludge, basically, right? It's like things that have been building up and like holding the nervous system back. And the nervous system then is expressing as something that can't generally, like if it's traumatized, can't go beyond the vibration of shame and fear. Mm-hmm. And so it has to like actually release all the buildup. And like what I see you seeing is like, let's just even say if they're like dendrites and DNA, like over time, it's like keeps repeating inefficiently in a way that's leaning more towards separation. And the universe is like, no, I'm reckoning with all that. I'm clearing the stuff that's imbalanced. I'm moving. And if interdependence is like a midpoint between separation and oneness, I'm moving from codependency. Maybe supremacy was closer to separation. Codependency. Now my next move is like a more interdependent universe. I'm pruning like all the density that isn't in alignment with that. And so that's what I felt and thought about in your own system is like, there's this reckoning coming up to like clear all of these like connections that your nervous system is holding as an expression of all the ancestry that you've ever been and will ever be in this now moment. And as a result, I would expect your nervous system to start to heal in a way, and as releasing that density, that it can hold a higher vibration, which would not be shame, and would bring you closer to being available for interdependence.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, especially because I think shame blocks accountability. And I think that there's parts of me that want to maintain independence and control because I actually do not want to be held accountable by an interdependent system. And shame, and part of why I was so excited to talk about it is because I think like a past part of me would have been like, I am never telling anyone about that dream ever, but like the one in me who's like, well, and I was looking at like the white supremacy cultural traits because I was editing one of the slideshows and thinking about like just how much control I have. Even coming into this show, I was like, oh my gosh, what if I say the wrong thing? Like I've been in DEI and where I'm like, I have to say it right. I have to make sure I get it right. And this one in me who just had never experienced accountability without shame. Like I never experienced a positive version of like an interdependent system where like my behavior impacted someone and I was able to like see that and feel it and notice it and make a change because I didn't want to hurt that person anymore or because I didn't want to do that. It was always just like, you were bad, you did the wrong thing, now you have to say you're sorry, like skipping over, just like using shame almost as a block to true accountability. And I see like myself doing
really
that.
What fragility is. I mean, that's really what white fragility is. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can feel it in the collective too. But just like finding that in myself, I was really doing some work on like, what would it look like to take full responsibility without taking on shame, which is, I think, feel like it feels like a simple question to land on, but it was such a like challenging one for me.
Yeah, that is really, I think accountability is a huge theme around interdependence, and it's coming up so much in my world right now. But I just wanted to stamp, like, I think I'm around a lot of conscious white people a lot of times, like trying to get it right. And it's just so interesting because the more I become aware of myself as energy and the more that I'm feeling bodies, what I experience, and I believe, like, just from reports, at least the people that I'm close to that identify as people of color, they can feel white supremacy culture in someone else. Mm-hmm. So the irony is we have all these conscious, like, people who are trying to get it right intellectually, as you're saying, but like energetically, like supremacy and domination and like, I don't give a fuck, I'm going to get my way, is like the energy that they're actually coming across. But even if their vocabulary is all the right things, or they're the first person to call out or cancel someone on the internet because it's like X, whatever it is, and that's what's been so interesting, is to be like, oh, like, this is something, it feels like a code. Like for me, I feel people's bodies feel like an iCloud. Like you are the iCloud of Marika, and Bethany's the iCloud of Bethany. And you have all these codes that are like actually moving and processing and like creating the software of you or whatever in every given moment. And like, I can feel in a system if that code is like playing. And if you are really conscious and really working hard to get it right, those are the people that have the hardest time being accountable to like someone who's saying to them, I can feel this in you. Well, what did I say? Well, what did I do? Well, and maybe sometimes you can point to that, but just in general, it's that consumptive, oppressive, extractive, it's, very egoic, very like my reality, and protecting my reality is the most important thing.
Yeah, and it's diagnostic and prescriptive too, because it's like, tell me what I did so I can fix it. Like, tell me what I did so I can, it's not like, let me revamp my whole vibe over here. Like,
and I think it has a change at a cellular level. And my experience of the alchemical change is a relational exchange between bodies that happens through the heart center. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot in art and the time that we're manifesting in terms of like the trauma and heartbreak and separation that we feel with each other, and especially relationally. It's really hard for 2 people or 3 people or 5 people to, have their needs met, feel safe at the same time, and express from the heart in a way that creates an alchemical change or empathy, where I'm like, oh, I can feel your experience in my own body in this moment. Yeah. And that so makes me believe you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think of it as like, everybody has on virtual reality goggles, like the Oculus game. Mm-hmm. And they're like, everybody's playing their own reality, and they're like bumping into each other. And someone's like, what? I'm on a farm. And someone else is like, no, I'm on an alien, whatever. Or, I'm in Kansas, and they're like, no, you're not. You're not in Kansas. We're on a farm. Because like nobody realizes like you're wearing your own goggles, and there's something in the body that lets you like take the goggles off and be like, oh, we're not playing the same game. Like, you're doing something totally different, but that looks cool. Or I've played that game before. I know how that feels. And that's why I think this like somatic experiencing and even medicine work, because it feels like we're in this kind of jump in evolution where like we have so much built up density that most of us, from multiple generations, multiple lifetimes, most of us couldn't heal it in one lifetime, so we need these like supports in the 3rd dimension to help us accelerate that process. But ironically, that's just for our witness to believe we're accelerating. We're just accelerating with the energy that's in motion. Mm. Yeah. And the way that that's simple, like I know some people are like, what the fuck is showing? Like basically the simple thing is like, our relationships really matter. Yeah. And being able to attune. And like what I'm seeing is like, I guess where I feel the most agency right now is like my relationship with my own body. Mm-hmm. then my relationship with like my children or my partner, like the next layer, my dogs, like the land that my house is on, then like my siblings, then my friends. Like the more I'm in right relationship here, and the more that I do to get in right relationship in the places that I'm not, then when I'm out in this realm, like further out with people who are very different or situations that are very confusing, I have so many more tools, because something about working on these insular layers is like refining me in a way that, and getting to the core of who I am in a way that these other layers maybe never could.
Well, and I mean, I think so many of us have trauma at the site of family. And so then we go and we try to make families, and families feel like actually the least safe place to do this work. And so we try to go do it out here in like the collective. But I feel like I feel you, Lauren, on like, and Bethany, I know you're doing this too, like in the home, like building these practices, like nesting from the inside out. And like, the other day I had this experience where, I very, poor Jonathan, my partner, like I project everything onto them. Like I use them just constantly, as we all do. But like, I was having this moment, I was doing like a Course in Miracles meditation. And I was like, oh, wait, let me, instead of like judging them for this thing, let me just try and see if I can do this in my own world. Like, let me see if I can let go and like shift into like love. And I did it. And I was like, just like, got there in myself, and I was just like, I was like feeling like so like open. And they walked into the room and they were like, hey, I just called my dad, and like had this totally miraculous conversation with them. And like something totally shifted in me as I was like, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like me doing the work in this perceptual space of my individual body actually like was freeing up energy.
Your atoms are entrained with each other. Your atoms are entrained with each other. And so when you raise a vibration in your atomic field, like all those who are like entrained with you, it also
totally
shifts.
And then, but then I was thinking about like, okay, so then the two of us had this miraculous moment that we shared in our like shared field of consciousness. And then we both are teachers and go out, like it shifts in these like little bubbles of like you're saying, in these kind of like fractal or nested realities. And that like, I think that was just a really humbling moment for me, because I like do a lot of work that's kind of like public, or I have like, I get like egoic about like public image and stuff like that. And I was just like, oh no, like home is the place.
And also it's exhausting or scary to believe that like if we have to like try and change other people, or like there isn't a lot of agency because you have a really low locus of control with other people. But if you start to realize like, and I think about that tree that fell down, and then it like knocked this down and knocked this down and knocked this down. Like if I believe that the power of my consciousness has that amount of strength, because the other piece is like, why would I be motivated to be resilient in my family system right now? Because in this time in history, what we're talking about, because so many of us have had multiple generations of trauma in our family, relationships are the most excruciating place to do the work. That's why we want to go outside. That's why we want to start new relationships. That's why we want to do whatever and it requires a lot of resilience. So the only thing that I can see is that if people become aware of how much them shifting how they show up and moving through that complication in the internal system impacts the collective and like radiates out, then now I might have the motivation and the willingness to like step into that discomfort, because otherwise it's hard for human nervous systems right now to understand like what's the payoff, except maybe also I think people's kids is where I see them the most willing to do it. Because that's a relationship that they're not willing to be like, well, I can just get another one. And that's the way I see people with relationships, is like, we treat them like it's like, I can get a new couch, I can get a new house. Like we've almost like materialized human beings. And so for whatever, with our own kids, it's like the one place where we're not like, I mean, I think there are probably a population of people, but generally speaking, it's easier to be like, well, there'll never be another Talon, and I only have one Talon. I only have one experience to like grow with him. So I am motivated to work through the conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been really thankful. We've been through our relational challenges and our sort of like wobbly, like what is our commitment to each other? But I feel like lately I've been really, really thankful for like the long commitment with Jonathan, because they're really, in my most intimate spaces is where like white supremacy shows up most intensely for me. Like when I'm not on my best behavior and like the one in me like comes out where like I could kill them when they call me out. Like I could kill them and they're like, whoa, I'm going to step away. You're not safe right now. And I'm like, oh. And I get violent, like literally. I mean, not like literally, but like, they're like, no, I'm going to step away. Like that energy is violent. And you
That's
need
the power of that program though. Like I see that happen in myself too, but like it's like this person's totally normal and it's like a fighting dog comes out when race comes up. It's like wild, like they just switch, and that's what makes me think like this is a program, like it's some kind of like fucking virus that attacks your cells. It's like the weirdest, craziest thing.
It's like people go rabid.
Yes, that's exactly how it is. Yeah.
Well, Resma talks about white ferality. Sometimes I use the word, like you've heard me use it, Lauren, like feral in relation to like the wild woman and that being like a really positive thing. But like Resma talked a lot about white ferality. And I was like, oh, that definitely. And when I was in those sessions, I was like revealing to Jonathan that like I was in those sessions and I was like, nodding along, like, yes, oh, I'm such a good student, which I totally am. Like, I'm on board. And my energy was like, I could feel it. It was like this. It was like, I wanted like destroy. And it was so overwhelming. Like, I was like, I have to reveal this to Jonathan because like, I am simultaneously like running this white supremacy, like, I'm going to kill this whole thing. And like a very like, yes, I'm totally here for this. Like, vibe at the same time. And I was just like,
it's just like a more exaggerated thing of the split that you're talking about. Like it's almost like an exaggerated character of like, when that's like just not what's happening at all. It's right. Like, oh, that's it. That's the thing that you're pointing to. That
it's funny you say that because I have had conversations with people of color who sometimes experience white people as that, right? Where they're like smiling and but they're energetically feeling like evil, and how like gaslighting it is to have that experience because you're feeling it in your body, one thing, and then seeing like a face that's like polite or whatever.
It's kind of interesting. So you guys both know Paul, but he is sort of a master at noticing that kind of incongruency and things like that. So he'll be like, some people we know maybe that we're watching videos of, he'll be like, she looks like she's smiling, but he'll notice these little things like it's rage in her eyes though. Look at that. That's rage. That's not joy. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I can see what you're talking about. Like noticing all these little flags. Like I think that we instinctually actually can see that, even if we're not totally tracking it. It's like, there's stuff that I can notice that is incongruent.
And if we can't feel our bodies, or we're having this kind of like, whatever this is, where people are like, not where this experience up here is different from what's actually happening down here. Then when you say to them, like, something feels off, what are you talking about? Everything's fine, and they literally don't know because they can't connect. And I, like a lot of people, their first kind of journey experience, afterwards they'll report like, I feel afraid. I'm afraid now all the time. And I'm like, baby, you were afraid. You've been afraid. Your body has been terrified for probably your whole life. Now you're just aware of it. And now that you're aware of it, you can make choices around it. But when you believe it's not there, or, you're not feeling it, you can work 80 hours a week and, do whatever it is, or not eat, or whatever the thing is, and just keep doing certain things to your body. And that's the irony of like feeling,
Yeah. It doesn't feel good at first.
Right. It's a fun conversation. This was a fun conversation. Is it over now? I'm trying to feel into like, so what? Like, what is the what is the awareness today that I'm like leaving as a result of this? Like,
Well, I had a couple other there were a couple other threads that was like, I wanted to come back. Like we started talking about kind of like doing this work in the fifth dimension or the fourth dimension. And I was thinking about, I think I have like a question about in like doing this sort of fractal work on white supremacy culture and like my ancestry and the collective and doing like individual and collective work. I always feel like a flag. I'm always suspicious of myself, or I'm always suspicious of like whiteness because it always wants to like evade accountability. And so I guess I want to like note that I think doing some of the work on the fourth dimension is super important. And I don't want to then just like avoid doing the work on the third dimension. So I feel like that's something that I just want to kind of like toss it out as like, hey, I want to like track this in like 6 months and be like, I don't want to get.
The story I have is that you're coming more in your body, and that my story would be that you, like your artwork, all these things like express like a deep understanding and awareness at those other dimensions. And that even though you've been physically living in the third dimension, that you're coming in more to the awareness of what it looks like to transmute and heal at the third dimension. So now you're bringing this awareness, and then that will allow you to integrate the two together.
Yeah.
And that you, from that integration, something even new, a whole new experience of healing, justice, whatever will be possible. And I think this thing of disassociation, which I actually wish we could just change that term, is just like choosing to be out for many generations because the density of your body is so uncomfortable. And now it being like supportive to interdependence in this arc that I'm talking about, to be like, oh, like us all being out in the fourth dimension hasn't been great for the planet, hasn't been great for, this reality that this kind of like system that we all call home, which is Earth. And so how do we get in right relationship with both, and then if you're kind of a generation, maybe, a body or a family system that's never really accessed those other dimensions consciously, then maybe that is your work for interdependence, is to believe in that, to become aware of that. And then we kind of all meet somewhere in that journey. And I was really challenged around this. I mean, when I first started journey work, and like my mentor was just like, you're out there, you're out there, you're out there. Like it doesn't, and it's like so weird how much that shifted in such a short time. And then now this journey of kind of like, okay, so then this next journey I feel like I'm embarking on is then like, what does it look like to exist in both and to quote unquote do work in both? What does it look like to, like I was saying, like seeing that circle where all these women are like consciously using astral travel to like go somewhere where sex trafficking is happening and bring like love and light, energy. Like what's the impact of that? And kind of to your point with the thing with Jonathan, it's like, what would, it's like the same thing, but with multiple people. So then what happens in this dimension where all those people are connected? Would we see something different? That, and if we understand what's needed to bring that change into the physical, and maybe it's a ceremony or whatever else, like, is there a whole nother level of healing or change available in that kind of awareness?
Are there ways in which like you're experimenting with like a group ceremonial space, or is that like something you're envisioning?
I'm envisioning. I'm more focused on like consciously astral traveling, and like before I go to bed, like setting intentions around it and then seeing what happens. Like I set an intention last night and what I got was not what I expected. I'm not saying like I did it wrong, but I just feel like there's some kind of like, how do I bring conscious awareness and like choice to astral travel in a way that I can do it asleep, that I can maybe eventually do it awake, that then I could teach other people to do it. Or I could, people, I have a lot of friends, like even like y'all, obviously it's like you're already doing it, but how do I support people to bring it more into conscious awareness? And then what would happen if we did it together? Like, that's kind of my curiosity.
I noticed like
healing things, like we're like, okay, we're going to astral travel, and Bethany's going to bring her light in and activate, and Lauren's going to do this. And so when you're talking about the beginning,
I'm
this
scared. I'm scared when you say that. Like, I feel like I don't know. Like, I don't know what goes on when we jump into other, like when we astral travel and come back. Like something about that guy that was that jumper. I got what you guys are talking about of like, I was scared of him and he was saying all the things, but I was like,
yeah,
and I feel like
you don't have to do it.
Well, I feel like he's been to these dark places and there's residue of it. And he's bringing it here. And now I'm sitting.
People are irresponsible and people are egoic, and they are egoically and from a traumatized state astral traveling, which is a really different when you astral travel to avoid reality, or when you astral travel for like, I don't know, vampiric is just the word that keeps coming up. But when you astral travel from that place, I think that you have those traces. You have like a toxic residue. It's almost like, did you ever read The Golden Compass?
Mm-mm.
Like the scientist in the book uses, okay, this is a wild thing, but he uses this golden dust. He extracts it from this process when he separates children from their soul. And in that severing, it releases dust. He uses that, and that's the fuel that helps him astral jump from universe to universe.
My friend was doing an energy. She took way too many mushrooms, and she's astral travels really easily. She was like in energetic space, and they were showing her that like a really popular like supernatural person, like in the mainstream that I won't name right now, but like is like has these events where there's like hundreds and hundreds of people in a conference room like doing their process, and that person is like sucking the energy from those people that come there, and I saw in one of my journeys like Elon Musk and doing the same thing and using the energy of Earth to try and colonize Mars. And so I do think and so then there's this other thing of like, what is right relationship? What is interdependence? Even like, if there's no evil and no good, like what, generally speaking, when I work with dark energy and dark entities, it's about bringing love and acceptance into that and like supporting them to integrate into wholeness.
And boundaries. Like part of bringing love is bringing boundaries. And even if there's like infinite, like, even if there's like infinite
access children or innocence in this plane, like how am I going to create some kind of energetic field so you can no longer access like kids or energy in this plane?
One more thing that I've been aware of is most people who astral travel, like a lot of people access astral projection from a near-death experience. Mm-hmm. And so the first time they touch that, it's from a place of terror, panic, because their body's responding to potentially dying. And that's when people pop out of their bodies and they see what's going on and they go to light and they come back. That's what it is. That's what astral projection and travel is, I'm pretty sure. So even probably the way that we're activated from that, like there might be something with that too, that, and like talking about responsibility, but like it would make sense to me that if it's born from a really acute trauma, the access place is from this acute trauma place inside of you, that the experience might be different than if it's accessed in a different way.
The other thing that I'm thinking about is like, I think that it will not be long, and maybe even us, like the three of us, like that we will consciously die and like, and consciously come into another reality. And so astral traveling at a near-death experience, right, in some ways is just maybe becoming aware of the jump,
Yeah, becoming aware of the jump. Like this guy that I talked to, he had a near-death experience in war, like in Iraq. And it's like,
and learn to jump from that,
Yes.
which is amazing.
Which is it also like skipping over the death? Like, is it consciously choosing not to quote unquote leave that body?
Right.
But then,
You chose to come
also being able to jump between. And I mean, the complexity of like some of the things that I've seen in other people and what's happening and like how many times their soul has split, and then the consequences for that soul and not being able to bring all the parts back together because they, let's call it jumping or time travel, whatever you want to call it. Like, they're all over the fourth dimension, and then they're creating like all kinds of like karmic consequences in all these different dimensions. And at some point, like, I do believe the universe bends towards justice, and if justice is balance, there's a reckoning, there's an integrating, there's a clearing, there's what is the most efficient, a more efficient path. And that, I mean, I'm scared to say this, but like, even when COVID like kind of came in and so many people were passing, like part of me felt like that, the virus was like looking for like less efficient material for evolution, and like choosing, and like you either upgrade or you die off. And that's like part of the evolutionary turn of events, and in the past, maybe it was a mass extinction or whatever it is. Like those types of things create like a whole new ecosystem of understanding of biodiversity and like creativity. But I think it's really just a more efficient learning from the, whatever happened before that.
I feel really like my intellectual mind is like so trying hard to like see the universe as like a conscious evolving thing, and I'm kind of like hitting like blocks in my ability to like see it and like understand it through like my inner sight, which is fine. I'm just noting that I keep kind of being like trying hard to like vision that in some way.
I think you would just, the way you would set an intention to know yourself as energy and to move your awareness, it would probably happen over time once you set the intention, some kind of process. But it's just, if we just use what we understand about a Big Bang theory or whatever, it's like, what came first? Light, energy, sound. Mm-hmm. So for you to experience the universe that way, your awareness would have to know yourself as light, energy, or sound. And remember how I said, like, I think your awareness knows itself as texture, So it's like, when did texture come in the equation? I would imagine if we're thinking about that linearly after energy and light, so you're asking your awareness to go to a place it hasn't maybe been yet.
That makes so much, I feel really seen. Thanks.
That's the other thing that I'm seeing on and like journey space or coaching is just like, I think Bethany does this too, like mapping all these different places that people's awareness can be. And then and you can either feel it in your body, or there's a way you can almost like visualize it. Right. And like, oh, you're over there. Or, like when Jim Detmer, I went to coffee with him and I had this experience of really, I'm always like, where are you? I've not been there. I don't know that place. And it's more the Lot Kelly. It's like, feels like literally like clear air or atmosphere. Like there's really like not a lot happening there. And like bliss obviously is super important. But I went there and I'm like, oh, that's where that is. And so then I just start mapping. So then when I coach someone and they're describing something, I'm like, oh, I've been there. I can find where you are and I can help you follow this map to this like other place and awareness that would support you to like integrate an understanding.
Yeah, I think that was some of what I was tracking with the work that I did this summer and the poster where I was linking up like Reiki work and like white supremacy and really tracking like, and I was thinking, Lauren, when you were talking about like, where does this show up at like higher dimensions? Just that like, yeah, those chakras and the sort of like traits of white supremacy that show up in like the vibration of each of those chakras, I think does go further and further all the way into like the 12th and 13th chakra. There's like etheric imprints but that's sort of like, oh, like I know this map and I know, and then I have all these like things over here and I'm going to track this system that doesn't want to be tracked according to this system and see if I can like get some clarity on like a pathway through, or a path to explore it in a way that like can make sense to my like working at both the body and mind level. But yeah, I love the idea of like mapping. It's like mapping the wilderness.
Yeah.
Wilderness Collective.
What's happening with the Wilderness Collective?
Good question.
It's dormant, or it's like everyone's out in the field.
I was about to say, I felt like all the seeds got dispersed.
Yeah.
See if the plant grow in like a.
It felt like it wanted to like release that form and like recollect in like a, not even in a different form, but in like a different configuration, or like an upgraded configuration. And it felt like there was like lots of seeds planted that wanted to complete. And just, so we sort of like closed the form that it was in. But it's interesting, Bethany, because Maya just closed that show.
Yeah.
And I noticed that I felt more complete on that initial thing when she had that completion, even though it was, our ceremony around it was literally in a text chain. It was like in a virtual psychic space, and it was retroactive because she didn't know to ask for it when she needed it. And so I felt like I was moving back in time, like creating ceremony in a psychic plane, to like hold that space and that energy for that like transition that was happening. But I didn't feel like the first iteration had closed without that kind of like completion. So it's an interesting, and the timing astrologically is super interesting to me, with like Mars going direct and Mercury going direct and like closure and new things. So I don't know what's happening with the Wilderness Collective. I'm tracking it and listening deeply, and she's doing her own thing right now. Anything else?
No.
I got a coach in a minute.
Yeah, I got to transition to get Taylor. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's fun tracking energy with you guys.
I feel like you guys have like 10 speeds and I like a 1 speed, and I'm just like trying to keep up.
I do like talking to Marika because I feel like she goes at a speed that I'm like,
yeah,
we can go. Like I do like that about our conversations.
Thanks. I like it too. I saw Jonathan right before I hopped on, and they were like, "Where are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm about to play with my friends. But like 2 of the only people that I can play at this level with, and I'm so excited." That's really fun. Thank you for hosting and for inviting me to be on the pod.
Thank you.
Our first returning guest.
It's super fun, right?
Thanks for listening. We welcome your feedback. You can email us at healingcollectivepod@gmail.com. Our website is thehealingcollectivepodcast.com, at Healing Podcast on Twitter, at Healing Collective Podcast on Instagram. Special thanks to Ethan Luck, who produces. You can find him at Ethan Luck on all platforms.